So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Swedish Consulate General in New York and to the webinar Sustainable IA, Applying Trustworthy and Ethical AI in Practice. I'm Annika Rembe. I'm Consul General of Sweden in New York, and I'm excited about this webinar together with, which is a collaboration between the AI Sustainability Center in Stockholm and the New York Academy of Sciences, together with the Swedish Consulate General here in New York. The United States and Sweden are of very different size. However, both countries are considered cutting edge in AI environment. And we are excited to create a webinar where the United States and Sweden can meet and share views. Sweden is home of world-leading automation companies, strong basic industries, leading IT and telecommunications companies, and innovative startups at the forefront of digitalization. These companies are rapidly developing and marketing innovative solutions globally. Artificial intelligence, AI, plays a crucial role in the digital transformation. And in an increasingly digitalized world, AI is becoming both an area of strategic importance and a key driver of economic development. It also affects all of us as customers and as citizens. So Sweden's government has made AI a priority and is expecting the technology to bolster both the country's competitiveness and welfare. And its national strategy for AI, the Swedish government has identified areas where Sweden needs to strengthen its efforts in order to be a leader. And one of the areas, and one important area that the Swedish government emphasizes is the need for strong relationships with leading international AI environment, such as the US and New York. We know that biased or manipulated data, lack of transparency, misuse and hostile use of data can lead to discrimination, to loss of trust, to financial damage, and to consequences for the functioning of democracy. So social and ethical aspects are therefore a central part of the Swedish AI strategy. And many New York institutions and initiatives share the same interest. And we are looking forward to a joint and continued discussion about the ethical AI today and forward. And with this, I think it's time to welcome our moderator, Chanel Bonavita Martinez from the New York Academy of Sciences. Chanel, I will leave the scene to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Annika. My name is Chanel Martinez, and I'm the Vice President of STEM Talent Programs at the New York Academy of Sciences. For the last 200 years, the Academy has been working to drive innovative solutions to society's challenges by advancing scientific research, education, and policy. I oversee the Academy's education programming, which is aimed at preparing students from grade school to grad school for the STEM careers of tomorrow. Today's event is on sustainable AI, applying trustworthy and ethical AI in practice, and it's broken up into 3 parts. First, we will hear from our speaker on trustworthy AI, and then following, we will look at practical frameworks for AI and ethics, and finally, we will wrap up with a panel discussion. I would like to introduce our first speaker, John Thomas. John is a distinguished engineer and chief data scientist at the IBM Data and AI Expert Labs. John leads IBM advisory services that help clients operationalize AI. As an IBM Distinguished Engineer and Chief Data Scientist in IBM's Data and AI business, John leads advisory services that can help clients establish an AI factory. He brings thought leadership to trusted AI at different stages of the end-to-end AI lifecycle. A lifelong learner, John has 25 years of experience in enterprise architecture, worldwide client success, and high-performing teams. John, welcome.
Thank you, Chanel. Thank you, Anika. Thank you to the AI Sustainability Organization. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Happy to share some perspectives with you on this topic of trusted AI. I do have a few slides. We can use that to sort of guide the conversation. But I think Anika in her opening section summed it well. This is the time for us to focus on the social, the ethical aspects of using AI in a responsible way. And there are aspects of technology, process, people that need to come together. And as leaders in this evolving domain, it's our responsibility, joint responsibility to pay attention to this. Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully the screen is visible. So, you know, we know that AI is increasingly being used to make decisions or help make decisions. In many cases, it augments human decision-making process, not necessarily replace humans. But even in that augmented decision-making process, how do you trust what the AI recommends? How do you know that the business can actually act on what comes out of the AI systems that are in place? And if you look at the news items, you know, there's lots of news that has been catching headlines over the last couple of years in this context. And, you know, in order to really understand what the challenge is, let's spend a few minutes looking at some of the aspects, some of the challenges in trusting AI. We keep hearing these terms, bias and fairness and robustness and so on. What do these mean? Let's spend a few minutes on them, maybe go through a couple of examples of how these come to light and talk about how to address them. Bias. Training data itself may be biased. So, you know, I always say AI is not magic. The algorithms learn from the patterns that exist in the data. I mean, it's not something magical. Now, there are advanced techniques for doing this, of course, but if the data that you start with has bias in itself, the algorithms are going to pick that up, and the models that are produced as a result will be biased themselves. Let's take a very, very simple example. Let's say a company is hiring, 100 men apply for jobs, and 100 women apply for the jobs. And out of the 100 men, 80 are selected, and out of the 100 women, 20 are selected. Now, is that outcome in itself biased? What if the qualifications of the male applicants were better than the female applicants? In that case, is it biased? More interestingly, if that's the training data that was given to the algorithm so that it learns of trying to predict to calculate an employment eligibility score, for example, or an eligibility for being hired, it is going to, if you don't do anything, that algorithm is going to go learn that somehow gender is part of this mix, and that it will surface, will make its way into the algorithm, doing its steps and then creating the model. And the model's prediction will be biased. Now, it's a very simple example of bias in data. Now, what about explicit versus implicit bias? Sometimes, let's say, sensitive variables, features like ethnicity. You might say, let's just make sure the models do not deal with ethnicity or race. Let's not have that in our payload. Let's not have that in our training data, in our payload, in the model construction and the model scoring, it's not used. Easy to say, but what if that same notion of ethnicity is going to creep in through other proxy variables? And we all know zip code is a notorious example of being a proxy. Easy enough to identify, but what if you are dealing with models that have hundreds, thousands of input features, and it's not obvious where the implicit bias is coming from? In the end, what is it that you need? You need to make sure that the models are trained and are predicting, regardless of whether the sensitive data is part of the payload, is part of the actual model invocation or not. In the end, we want to make sure that a certain set of privileged groups are not at a systematic advantage compared to unprivileged groups, whatever that definition of privilege and unprivileged is at a corporate level. Drift. No, it might be, we say in the data science world, every model is awesome on day one of its production use, and it becomes useless a week from then. It's because, the model accuracy drifts, the underlying data patterns drift in most real world scenarios. There are things that are pretty static. But if the data itself is changing, the training data did not include data ranges or combinations that are now being seen in real life, and you don't take, you're not focused on this, your models will begin to drift. So for example, age ranges that were used in the training data are not the same age ranges that are being seen while the model is being used. That's not what is being, that's coming into the model for actual predictions. Robustness. How do you defend against attacks, adversarial attacks? How do you make sure that that the training data has not been poisoned with malicious samples? And then explainability. Now, in the days where you had rule-based decision-making, it was easy. If this and that and this and then that. Now, it was easy to explain. Traditional statistical models were easy to explain. But as the algorithms get more advanced and complex, as you get into more advanced structures like neural networks, how do you actually get into explaining an outcome? And an interesting question is, it is not just about explaining an individual transaction, but actually being able to do what-if scenarios and say, at what point would the outcome have been different? These are all challenges. Now, if you look at the life cycle, these challenges surface in different parts. We talked about data itself being biased, or data having poisoned samples, and that creeps into the model building stage. And it might not get captured as part of a model validation stage. And then when the model has been deployed and is being used, drift and explainability at an incoming transaction level. These are all important challenges that need to be addressed across AI lifecycle. So let's take a look at a few examples. We apply for loans. Loans are automatically approved or rejected, or sometimes a human gets into the middle of the approval process. How do we know the decisions are fair? Does the loan approval process favor one group over another? What if again, to the point made earlier, even if the sensitive data is not part of the model scoring, how do we know that the model is still being fair? At a corporate level, this requires you to define what is appropriate, what is fair, what is the policy, what is the philosophy around how these models should be used. What fairness thresholds are appropriate, and then monitoring over time. If you are in healthcare, for example, models that predict the likelihood of a patient outcome. What if the population itself is changing? What if there are a lot more people with a risk profile that was not seen when the model was trained? So there is drift in the actual underlying data patterns. How do you look at this? HR. So this is an interesting use case from a client engagement that we did. At the corporate level, the corporation has said, everything we do will be socially responsible, including hiring. We are defining a set of policies at the corporate level, And it's our responsibility to make sure that when we use AI for decision-making, direct or augmented, it is in line with the corporate policies. So if you look at the compliance team, they say, okay, don't use sensitive data like ethnicity and gender directly, but we still want to make sure that the models and the predictions are fair. If you look at the data science teams, they are concerned, how does this all fit in with existing tools and libraries and frameworks that they're using? If you look at the ops team, they're looking at, how does this work integrate with our existing deployment, orchestration, monitoring processes? So it's not a trivial challenge. So the approach that we find practical is to bring together different aspects in a cohesive way. There is the technology aspect, and we will talk about it, but people play a very important role. Who is responsible for defining the policies at the corporate level? What is ethical and what is not at that particular business's level and across industries? What is the organizational structure in place to help think through this problem beginning to end? If you don't think about this at the business use case level and try to address this only at the coding or model building level, it will be a failure. How do you train people to be cognizant of the requirements around this area? Then process is a set of best practices for each stage of the life cycle, all the way from setting corporate vision to defining a set of use cases that the business cares about, to building these AI models, to deploying them, to trust at the consumption level. As the end users use this, how do you make sure on an ongoing fashion that these are trustworthy? So from a technology perspective, there is a tremendous amount of innovation happening in the open source community. There are researchers looking at these problems. IBM Research in particular has done a lot of work in this space and has made available a number of these functions as open source contributions. So for example, the Adversarial Robustness Toolkit, ART, provides a library to understand attack, defense, and detection methods. The AI Fairness 360 Toolkit that's a library, again, contributed to open source. Anyone can go and download it off of the GitHub location and use it. It helps you detect and remove bias, both in the data set level and at the model level. And Explainability Toolkit, which provides a variety of explanations, both at the local and global level in an interpretable, understandable way. Now, what are these doing? They are providing guardrails. And as I mentioned earlier, it is important to understand that trust in AI doesn't happen just at build time, but across the entire life cycle of AI. And these guardrails, it's important to have these guardrails in place so that even if something leaks through one aspect of the life cycle, you can catch it at the next or catch it at the next. So if you look at some of the open source tooling, it allows you to catch it at the inner layers. So pre-processing steps, in-processing steps. Then obviously there is technology that takes us further, not open source at this point, but allows you to do much more at a product or a technology platform level, provide guardrails at a holistic level. So OpenScale is a particular technology that does that. As a quick example, right? So if we talked about ongoing monitoring. In this case, let's say we are interested in gender, making sure that gender is used fairly in a model's prediction. Let's say this is for a particular predictive use case. If you look at the ongoing monitoring that is being done, and you pick our data point, let's just zoom into that. It says 78, we have defined that females are the monitored group and males are the reference group. It's all up to us, right, what we define. In this case, we see 78% of the monitored group had a favorable outcome and 81% of the reference group had a favorable outcome. There are many, many different ways in which you can calculate whether something is, you can express whether something is being fair or not. In this particular case, we're looking at a metric called disparate impact value. It's 96% in this case, 78 versus 81. Now, it's the company's decision as to whether that is at a level where action is needed, whether mitigation is needed. If mitigation is needed, how do you do debiasing at the model level? Or do you need to step back into mitigation at the initial pre-processing data level itself? It's a decision that can be made. In a similar way, I mean, I won't spend too much time on this, but guardrails across the entire AI lifecycle, from building challenger models, from doing validation in a methodical way, getting into model risk management, looking at drift in data consistency and accuracy, looking at local and contrastive general explanations for the model. All of these are important guardrails for the lifecycle. At development, at validation, at ongoing monitoring and in production. I want to end with this slide here, which talks about, this is not just about applying technology, as I mentioned earlier. Technology is important. You need mechanisms to understand, to detect, to simulate, to defend. But unless the strategic vision for this has been established, technology will not serve a purpose. So across industries, we need strategic vision. In a particular industry, healthcare or finance, you need a vision for that industry. And then at the corporate level, at that business level, what is the vision for your particular company, your particular organization? What is your philosophy? Is AI going to be strictly used for augmenting human decisions? What is your policy for fairness? What is your policy for transparency? Do you need to provide generalized explanations for everything that the model does? That's a corporate strategy as a vision that needs to be set. Then from there, one step down, as different lines of businesses start working on their use cases, whether it's hiring or loan approval or fraud detection or customer management, you name it, across the hundreds or thousands of different use cases. For each of those use cases, do we understand what the actual KPIs are, key performance indicators are? Do we understand what the privileged groups are? What type of data is sensitive? What are the thresholds that you need to worry about? What are the kinds of explanations needed? And then this gets instituted throughout the rest of the ML ops lifecycle. Model building, validation in pre-production. Connecting this with GRC systems, governance and risk and compliance systems. Moving the model from development to pre-production to production, and finally having these running in a production setting where the business is consuming these models for their decision making. And you need a set of best practices across these different stages of the life cycle. Technology will help, but think of the full picture. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this very important topic. Looking forward to discussing and collaborating with each of you.
John, thank you so much for that interesting presentation. It's so great to see you again and to see how far IBM has come with your work. And I think about all the companies that we work with and talk to, and IBM is certainly among the most forward-leaning and progressive in this space when it comes to, you know, the bigger tech sector. So my first question for you really goes to the heart of that. So when you think about the industry more broadly, you think about IBM, and then you think about the industry more broadly, what really do you think is the role of the big tech companies these days? What's the responsibility when it comes to ethical AI? I mean, how do we take this forward from a societal point of view?
Elaine, it's great to see you again. One of these days after the lockdown, we should meet again.
We will.
So what is the role of tech companies? I mean, just to answer this, even broader than tech companies, this is a responsibility that we all jointly share, how AI is used, right? I think we've talked through that. From a tech company's perspective, it is making sure that the technology that is produced can actually support the kinds of topics we are talking about. So when a particular product is rolled out, whether it is a product specifically meant for building and deploying AI, or it's a product that uses AI, there has to be a conscious decision-making that goes into how that product is rolled out. As an example, in IBM, there is a governing body called the AI Ethics Board, which actually looks at every new product that is being built and developed to make sure that it is ethically sound. The principles that are being used in terms of decision-making are ethically sound. Now, that is additional, in some sense, people might think it is overhead, but it is, I think, absolutely essential that as tech companies come out with products, they look at this in a very systematic way.
How do you take that approach that you have integrated within your own processes and certainly from the life cycle product management point of view? How do you take that and scale that? Would you say, are your clients interested? Do you work on IBM's own solutions with this? How do you start to get a bit more traction and scale? Some people say it's early days, it's early, we don't have the regulatory frameworks yet. What do you think? I mean, is it possible to scale up this type of approach?
Yes, absolutely, and I think we should. If you look at the regulated industries, especially finance, right? The financial industry actually has had probably the most advanced set of regulations in the space. If you look at the SR 11.7 regulations, for example, it defines what model risk management should be. So it talks about what defines a model, it talks about the steps in an MRM construct. Now, that was framed before the whole ethics in AI discussion came up, but at least there is a framework which says, hey, you have to go through these steps as part of a model risk management practice. You have to prove that your models are managed for risk from a reputational risk, from a business risk, and so on. I think it is just a normal extension of that paradigm to say it is also the social responsibility aspect, the ethical aspect that needs to be part of this regulation. We see this beginning to come into other industries like healthcare, and I think it is just a matter of time. I think for us, we need to start looking at this now before decisions are made by solutions that are rolled out, which have a huge impact either from a reputational perspective or from a social responsibility perspective.
Let me ask you one last question before we run out of time in this segment. You come with so many insights and experience and have clearly been working with this and with your team for a very long time. What's your advice to startups? I mean, how can we get the next generation, the scale-ups, the startups, how can we get the next generation to be more purpose-driven and aware of these types of risks from the start? What would be your advice?
I would say there's a lot of discussions around this topic, understanding what are the most significant problems and how they relate to your particular industry, whether you're a startup or a corporate. It's the responsibility is the same. We are all equally responsible. But it may be that the particular solution that you're building as a startup, it might be limited in scope or it may not. But if you have to look at topics like bias and drift and explainability and robustness and what is the policy for the product that I produce? What is my responsibility for that solution? You've got to start there. Start with open source. There's such a tremendous amount of innovation happening in open source. I would start there. Look at what is available out there, research available from multiple institutions around the world in this topic. Contribute, collaborate, and it becomes a movement.
Thank you so much, John. It's been amazing to have these moments with you. In some ways, well, COVID makes our lives harder. In some ways, it makes it easier to get you in your time. We know you're very busy. So thanks for sharing your perspective and some of the work that IBM's doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Leigh.
So from this, we'll transition now to hear a bit about how we see frameworks from AI Sustainability Center perspective. So we'll just pull up the presentation here. And the AI Sustainability Center, we're based in Stockholm, and we always talk about being a Nordic approach to responsible and purpose-driven technology because we're based in the Nordics and look very much at society as a stakeholder. So everything that we do, we're very much complementary to what John was explaining from IBM, but we're a bit more into the impact on people, sort of the end effect. So I'll walk you through that a bit. Okay, maybe. So we're at a crossroads, and our starting point when we started the center, Anna and I, was that we were big believers in AI and the power of technology for good, but we also knew that something was missing, that things were scaling in a way that were these discrimination, bias, these types of risks were starting to come to the forefront. So we wanted to be on that positive business train about capturing the benefits and the opportunities, but we also saw that things were happening. We had things like Snowden and Cambridge Analytica, and I hope everyone has seen The Social Dilemma by now. That kind of sums up where we are today. So we have these, this duality. We have the enormous opportunity, and then we have, the risk side of it. So that was kind of our starting point. We have a 2-second technical pause. I will be right back. I'm back. So when it comes to AI, why is AI different? AI takes technology to a new level. We have what we talk about exponential benefits. If you're driving new revenue streams, or if you want new and tighter relations with your clients, you have many new business benefits and opportunities. But also, maybe you're looking at the need to be more efficient through automation and different type of efficiency gains. Or if you're in life sciences or academia, you might be looking at AI to help you with breakthrough cures, maybe even COVID. So we see that the exponential benefits are there, but so too is the risk. What can happen with AI is that when you're building a model that's self-learning, if you don't take into account some of the areas that John described, some of what we will call pitfalls, and I'll come back to that, you can inadvertently start to scale or amplify the things that you were hoping to avoid, like biases and discrimination. So the stakes are higher and things can quickly go wrong if you don't have control of that. Okay. And we're also in a time where technology is ahead of regulation. We look at GDPR, for example. That took years to evolve, but GDPR is a starting point for coming into the AI world and starting to look at the societal and ethical impacts. It's not an endpoint. So there can be a false sense of security with many companies when they think that they're GDPR compliant, and that's all that they really need to do. So this is really a starting point. And why do we want to talk about sustainable and ethical AI? We know that when we start to look at unattended consequences, you can have many different risks that you didn't foresee. And this, what can happen is that this not only can violate the trust of your stakeholders, but you can come into some pretty serious reputational and financial losses as well. So we need to find a more systematic approach to start to address these risks as part of a normal business framework. And like all sustainability issues or strategies, this should not be something on the side. This needs to become part of the business model, part of the business strategy. There's only one business strategy in a company or an organization. So we need to bring these together. And when we talk about some questions here, like how far can we go in the collection of personal information for credit or risk scoring? And is it okay for a gaming app to capitalize on persons with gambling addiction? These used to be, at the worst case, something that could come up in the media and create a PR problem for a company. But today, as things are scaling with AI on a much different level, these quickly become boardroom discussions and decisions. John showed you some examples. We saw Apple and Uber and all companies, whether you're a tech sector or whatever sector you're in, as you come into the AI world, I would say maybe the tech sector has been working with this longer, so is more prepared to, start to address these issues. But as we come into many other sectors that are digitalizing, you can see that it can, if you don't have the right competence and the right tools at your disposal, it can quickly become off track. So many organizations have started to recognize this problem. IBM, we've heard about their approach to trustworthy AI. They have also developed principles. You have a link in the presentation if you want to look into them more broadly. Microsoft is also on top of this. They're looking at fairness, inclusiveness, reliability and safety, and so on. Intelia is a telecommunications company in the Nordic who's also working on trusted AI principles, and also a partner to the center where they're working through the framework that I'll come into. So the good news is that the problem is starting to be out there, and people are starting to understand that there is, an issue here, but it's still a jungle. And how do you address it? How do you start when you're that person sitting in a company and you want to do the right thing? How do you start to do it? Where do you start? Do you start with principles? Do you start with a simple use case? Do you start with, your whole product development? The point is you have to start somewhere. So that's where our framework comes in. So before we come into the AI Center, what other frameworks are out there? In addition to what companies are doing, we're starting to see, and this has been going on for the last couple of years, the European Union has published trustworthy AI guidelines. There's been quite a large community of researchers and different stakeholders that have given input to those guidelines. We have IEEE. UNESCO has recently, as recent as August, just published some guidelines around trustworthy AI that have been distributed in the UN system and gone out to member states. So this is happening on a UN system, but how do we get that into individual companies and organizations that are working with AI? And of course, the ITU has been working with AI for good, but also standards on many different levels here. And we also have national standards institutes. We have countries like Sweden that has started to look into how to develop standards around the application of trustworthy AI guidelines. So regardless of whether you're that company or you're looking at it more on the policy level, what we're saying on the AI Center is that we need a new type of lens, and that lens should not just be a technical lens. It's not just for the data scientists, the coders, the algorithm developers, but we need to have a broader perspective looking at what could the legal and regulatory framework is, and probably most importantly, who are our stakeholders and what is the impact that we're having on our stakeholders when we deploy new technological solutions. And we like to start from our framework with what we call fundamentals. And these are broader principles that apply to areas like transparency. How transparent are you to your stakeholder about your technology solution and how it's deployed and the data that you've collected and used? Can you explain how the model took decisions and how that could affect the end user of that solution. Do you have a system in your organization that is integrated into your normal governance framework? And do you have people or teams that are accountable for how those decisions are made and deployed? So this is a new type of lens that we think needs to be closely connected and integrated with the business model. And how would you start to measure that? What types of things would you look at? We have a very complementary approach to what John presented, but we maybe divide the world and the issues a little bit differently. But we start with immature data and AI. This is where what we call one of the pitfalls, and these 4 pitfalls that I'll talk about, we're suggesting and proposing that organizations need to have systems in place to identify where these pitfalls could occur, how to measure them, measure the potential impact of them, and eventually mitigate them. So immature data in AI is when there's insufficient training of the algorithm, or the data might be training data. Is it ready for market? Is it representative of the community or the situation upon which the model will be deployed? We also look at misuse and overuse of data. That's when maybe you have created a solution for a very good purpose, but that it is misused by others or overused for ways that you didn't intend. Do you have systems in place to prevent and detect and be prepared for that eventual occurrence? And then we look at 2 types of biases. We have bias of the creator. That's the programmer, the person who is sitting and creating a model or plotting the plan for the tech team and the actual algorithm. Is that person inadvertently programming in their own values? Do you have a diverse team that's creating your AI solution? And then you have data bias, where the data itself could be biased, and it may or may not be an accurate reflection of reality. Here's where you need different data validation and other tools. I have a very loose clicker here, as you can see. And well, what can happen if you don't control for those pitfalls and if you don't have those fundamentals in place? We look at a number of different risks, and we see that regardless of the sector you're in, and today we're going to come to a very specific focus on employment and labor, but regardless if you're in telecom or in recruitment or whatever field you're in, we see different risks occurring, like privacy intrusion or amplified discrimination, inequality, social exclusion, denied access to public services, harm to safety, security, and psychological well-being, and the prevention of individual autonomy and fundamental freedoms. Can your organization afford any of these violations of trust? Of course you would intend this to happen. This is where we're starting to see in the world, the cases in the world is the reality, and it less in a systematic way. So we have created a framework to look at what's the problem, how bad could it be? So those pitfalls, if I pause on the second circle here for a minute, called risk scanning and risk profile, this is a self-assessment tool that we've developed for any organization using or planning to use AI. You can look at your specific use case, you answer about 140 questions, and we help guide you to understand where could you have pitfalls, where could you have risks, and then as we come into the later phases of the framework, it's about what can you do about it, and we see how severe could it be. And this model or this framework is very much designed to be part of a risk and compliance within a company. So we're creating a tool that anyone deploying AI will be able to use from that risk and compliance perspective, but of course cross-functionally within an organization. The output of that self-assessment is what we call an ethical risk profile. This is just one visualization of where you can start to see, based on how you answer the questions, where you could have risk areas in accordance with the pitfalls. So on the bar chart, you can see where the red areas is where, we're not saying that it is a definite risk, but it's where you want to dive deeper into your own work and make sure that you're not inadvertently causing those risks. So we see a lot of benefits of this. We're working very much as kind of an independent validation of responsible use of data and AI. We think it's a great way to start to do a health check, but not only get that health check, but from the health check, identify actions that you can take to mitigate those risks. And this is about being proactive with your brand, with your stakeholders, being ahead of the curve, and really starting to move the needle and take some bigger, bolder actions to make sure that if you're using AI, you want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think it's really exciting that this issue is starting to increase in awareness, and many different, we're going to hear from public sector, private sector, lots of different organizations working with this. So thanks for listening. And from here, I hand back over to Chanel, the moderator, who hopefully has less tech problems than I did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. So I'm thrilled to be moderating today's panel on what is at stake when applying AI in employment and recruitment within the public and private sector. We all know that advancements in AI have produced a range of talent assessment and identification tools that put power in the hands of employers to make database hiring decisions. These tools can analyze strengths, development needs, and career fit. Video-based tools could even look at speech and tone of voice, but what's at stake when applying AI to recruitment? So I'm joined today by 4 panelists who will tell us more about this topic. But before I jump into that, I would like to turn the conversation over to Anna for some opening thoughts.
As Sustainability Center, and I'm just going to open with a study, some remarks of a study that the AI Sustainability Center did with TRR, a Swedish public organization that offers expert assistance to redundant staff, to employers and trade union representatives in the private sector. And they reached out to Swedish companies' recruitment departments and asked them a couple of questions regarding AI in their recruitment processes and tools. And it resulted in that the majority of the people that answered, they're considering using AI in recruitment. But more interesting is that 80% answered that they are interested in learning more about AI ethical and societal risk related to AI in their recruitment. And I want to add also to Elaine's presentation that the EU white paper on trustworthy AI, they did identify high stakes sectors that they will in the future, or actually in the near future, apply regulations such as explainability, accountability, and transparency. And recruitment and employment is among these high stake sectors, such are health, public sector, and transportation. So I'm just very also happy. No, Chanel, you will present the excellent panel. I will just do some opening remarks here because now we're deep diving on recruitment. And I think that is extremely important because the benefits are vast, no doubt. So there are reduces of costs, it saves time, and it also helps to do better recruitment, and also it decreases the effect of human bias. So these are strong and fundamental arguments for embracing AI in recruitment. Yet, there are risks, and I would also say that in the panel discussion we have today, since COVID and Corona is both fast tracking digitalization and the use of AI, it's also hurting the public finances and also pushing public employment organizations to use AI in a too fast and uncritical way. So the risks related to AI in recruitment is data bias. And now I hope you have the unintended pitfall from Elaine's presentation and also from John's presentation. So when the data is not representative of the reality or the preferred reality. So, but who's to say, who's to dictate to the preferred reality? So we've seen that Amazon withdraw their recruitment AI application because it recommended white males to CEO positions. But it's not only what you can do with the data and validate it to reduce and filter the data toward gender. The algorithm will learn, even though the algorithm doesn't know if it's a male or a female, no, due to the behavior of the person, if it's a male or a female. So there's a lot of hidden knowledge within a data set. Also, we have discrimination due to the fact that the coder unintentionally codes his or her own values, or doesn't actually know how to code diversity or how to code gender equality, because these are intuitively could be 2 different or 3 or 5, 6 different ways of coding. So of course we will hear from the panel how they gave themselves for a moral license to operate, to create explainability, transparency, and accountability, so we can kind of, with this Corona fast tracking and the increased unemployment level, do this in a responsible manner, because we know that without AI, there's only a tiny bit of all the applicants or the unemployed that could actually get help. So we are going to embrace AI, but in a responsible manner. And as an economist, I want to dwell a little bit on the data bias, because as we search for the future productivity gains, they will be in scalable technology sector, and it will be a mismatch between the historic competence and skill needed for the future. So both in sake for discrimination, but also in sake for productivity growth and employment, this is crucial. Chanel, was that okay, or should I stop there?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Yes, let's jump right into the panel. So thank you, Anna. Now I would like to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves and give a brief overview of their organization. And while you're introducing yourself, please tell us how you're applying AI and where you see future AI developments for your organization. So we have some panelists in person with Anna. We have some panelists over Zoom. So I'd like to ask the panelists over Zoom to turn on their video when they speak. But Bjorn, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my name is Björn Elofsson, and I'm one of the founders of JobAgent and the CEO. And I've got a background as a licensed psychologist, and I've been in this space here for almost a decade in the employment space. And we created JobAgent actually as a way of questioning how recruitment works. Because if you look at it, it always starts with a job ad. And I mean, as a talent, you have to do so much. You have to, well, tweak your resume, you have to do your cover letter, answer a bunch of assessments, and then you get declined. It's like, that's usually how it works, the sad side of it. So we wanted to turn that upside down by questioning the notion of, do we have to start with an ad, and does it have to be like that where the employer is in the front seat and decides? Couldn't we turn it all around? So with that said, we've created a sharing service for talents where we help you through our platform to describe who you are, what you're good at, your strengths and your skills, and then everything is presented in a nice looking ad about yourself, like a digital CV, but with much better data in it. Which means that we use that data to make you searchable for recruiters and hiring managers, which means that the other side of this side, the recruiters and hiring managers, can apply to you instead. So we turn that upside down, which means that the effect is, well, you will be part of anonymously every recruitment process that ever takes place in the entire platform without ever having to apply for any single job at all. That's the effect. And then our AI in this is obviously the extremely important layer between all the talents and their data, their assessment data, their skills data, their preferences, all that, and to translate that into what the employers are looking for. So there's our AI part of our platform.
Great, thank you. And Johan, do you want to go next?
So I'm Johan Gabrielsson. I'm the head of data science and digital platforms at the Swedish Public Employment Service in Sweden, also known as Arbetsförmedlingen. And I'm running a department focused on all kinds of digital platforms within the IT space. And then more specifically, we're focused on information management, data management, and then together with that, we then have an AI center, and we have a unit for data-driven analysis. And the AI Center has been built up for the last 3 to 4 years, focusing on building AI solutions for the supporting business within Arbetsförmedlingen and the core business. And we have approximately 20 people working at the AI Center. And I guess what we're most proud of within the AI area is the solution that we actually launched in spring this year, which is a AI solution for our core business focused on profiling the job seekers. So all the new job seekers coming to the Swedish Public Employment Services registering, we are then running towards an AI engine based on more than 1 million historical profiles of job seekers with approximately 200 data points per profile, which means then that we can more accurately and more objectively assess how far from the job market the new job seekers are when they're coming into Arbetsförmedlingen as customers then. And that means then in effect that in the end we will be able to more accurately decide on what mitigation actions or measures or actions we put in place for the individual job seekers. So obviously if you're 1 month from getting a new job, or if you're 3 years from getting a new job, then you can take completely different actions when it comes to subsidized jobs or higher education that we recommend, etc. So that is then heavily helping us to improve the situation for our job seekers, hopefully getting them into a place where they can get a new job much earlier than they did before. And this was then a process that was carried out before by caseworkers, and obviously the caseworkers not having any good IT systems to support their jobs when it came to profiling and nor the data points, it was quite impossible for them to do a perfect job when it comes to doing the profiling on their own manually. But with the help of this AI solution, then we can then replace that step of the core process at Arbetsförmedlingen then. So it's really key to us, not only from an efficiency perspective and a customer value perspective, but also from a objective perspective to really evaluate and assess in a much better way than we did before. And that, I mean, even if we're working together with AI Citizen Build Center right now to assess the risks that we have in the AI solution, what we know for sure is that the solution is still much better from an unbiased perspective than what we had before, because it was obviously then quite impossible for the caseworkers to be completely unbiased and non-discriminating, etc. Then, so we have taken a big step in our core business to work with new technology in a good way, but that doesn't mean that we still have challenges. We need to continue to work to solve the issues and mitigate those risks that John and Elaine and Anna brought up before here. So, but that's something we believe we're quite unique with doing, actually having a core AI solution in the core business of work we're doing, even if we're being a public sector actor, which normally would be seen as something being a bit more, well, not as proactive as the private sector then. So that's something we're very proud of to have put in place then. Okay.
That's great, thank you. Ashutosh?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. First of all, really appreciate for the invitation and thank you for setting up this panel. This is such an important topic that is affecting all of us today. At Eightfold, we are applying AI to not only help with employment, but how we can use AI to reduce bias and improve diversity. Today in tech sector, less than 20% people are women. So diversity is a big issue. And employment has been a challenge, and with COVID, it has only gotten worse. So what we are doing at Eightfold is learning from the data of hundreds of millions of people to understand each and everyone's career trajectory, how these people have progressed in their career, to better understand not only what skills they have, but what are their capabilities, potential, what they can do in future. Because we can never solve diversity if we keep looking for the people who have done the work. We have to look for the people who can do the work. Today, our platform is used by some of the leading enterprises across the globe for the entire talent lifecycle. But what I'm even more excited about is what we were able to do over the last 6 months during COVID time. First, we participated in Veterans Challenge. Every year, 200,000 plus veterans in US move from defense to the civilian workforce. So we participated in the challenge to see how AI can use to help map the career trajectory of these people and guide them with what they can do next in their career. And so that was a phenomenal success. Second is we also launched a talent exchange, because during COVID times, what happened is many industries got decimated, where some other industries are thriving. In that case, it was no longer about how one individual can get another job. You have to really understand the potential of each of these people and how it can be mapped to a job in a different industry, different sector. And today we have hundreds of companies using our talent exchange to place impacted people, workers during the COVID time. We are also working with UN World Tourism Organization, because tourism has been hit really hard, to help the impacted workers in these times. So I'm really looking forward to this topic today, is how we can reduce bias, improve diversity, and help with employment. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So the first question is, what ethical and societal risks of applying AI in recruitment do you currently face and address in your day-to-day work? Things such as discrimination, inequality, lack of success, lack of access to social services. And this is to anyone or everyone, so everyone can please feel free to jump in with their answers and perspectives.
I can start.
Great.
So thank you. Discrimination in recruiting and hiring is there. Whether it be in the process of how jobs are created, what enterprises are looking for, sometimes it's the subconscious bias, to how different people perceive different things. There's a study by Harvard Business Review which shows that women will not apply for a job unless they feel they have all the skills required for the job, whereas men will apply for the job even if they have very few skills required for the job. You show up for the interview, they can be biased over there. And the bias is not just at the gender level, but race, ethnicity, age, at all these levels, right? So what we are doing is multiple things. One is you have to think about like how you can build products that can fundamentally help with this thing. So instead of these people coming and searching for jobs, can we proactively guide them around what jobs might be relevant for them? And with that, what we have seen is in many of our customers, the number of female applicants have gone up by 60%. One other interesting thing that we are doing is masking the profile. Anything that is not relevant for a job, why should it be communicated to the hiring manager or the recruiter? So for example, you don't need to know the candidate's age. So let's mask that information, like when they got their education. If enterprise is concerned about bias with respect to colleges or universities, if a candidate has been in the workforce for more than 10 years, why do you care whether they went to Stanford or another college? Sometimes name can give away your race, gender, ethnicity. So let's hide that information because it does not matter for the job. So by applying these means, we are able to help a lot over there. Another big part is the analytics. Unless you're able to measure and expose what's going on, you can't solve it. So we fundamentally believe that. So helping enterprises understand through analytics where the biases may exist in the organization and how at each stage you can inspect and then go in to reduce that bias.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Would others like to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that I totally agree with that, as in we do the same thing at Job Agent, as in masking the totally irrelevant information like your name, age, sex, gender, ethnicity, stuff like that. But it's, in recruitment, this is a high risk area. If we just look at the fundamentals of how we as humans are made, when we do evaluate them and judge other people, we do it by categorizing people into different groups. Like that's how we are made, which means that we are, as human beings, biased. So in order to get away from that, obviously, then the way to do that is to just look at qualitative and good data, which we were talking about right now, and we do the same thing. And I think that that's so important. And as an example, when we have a client that says, I'm looking for a leader, for instance, someone who has great leadership skills, what we do then is we translate leadership from this biased notion of what does a leader look like into qualitative data, as in can take initiative, be structured, problem solving, etc., or whatever that definition might be, into qualitative good data. And I think that that's one way to go forward in order to not do these adverse impacts and act biased.
I guess from a Arbetsförmedling perspective, then working with clients or customers in a different way, I guess it's not as clear as in the recruitment part where you have a yes or no, you get the job or you don't get the job. We as I brought up the example, we're working with profiling and targeting towards our job seekers to support all of them. So it's not an option to only support those job seekers closest to the job market. So for us, it's quite relevant to also understand and use data that actually includes also gender and age and those kind of things, because that means that we can pinpoint the actions much better. We need to support everyone. It's not one size fits all. So that makes it a bit trickier for us, because we actually need to have all of those kind of data points that actually helps us derive to a better profiling. And that makes us having to work much more with all the risks. We can't avoid them by anonymizing the data points that might be tricky. We need to work with them too, but we need to work with them in an ethical way then. So it's slightly different for us, even if I understand that the problem or the challenge from a recruitment perspective might be a bit different, since that's more a yes or no, you get the job then. So.
And do you think the risks in this space are different in the public versus the private sector when looking at your clients or the people? Thank you. So let's jump back into this question that I asked about the public versus the private sector. Do you think the risks differ in dealing with these two segments or dealing with clients in these two segments?
I would say yes then, from that aspect that Anna brought up, that the room for mistakes within the public sector is close to none, basically, because we need to build up credibility and we can't really break any rules or regulations at all from day one. It's slightly different, I would say, from a private sector, because there you're focused on creating value, customer value, and value for your business. And if you do mistakes, of course, then you won't build up the revenue in the same way. But I would say that we are even more focused on really making sure that we don't break any rules or regulations, which means that we need to justify everything twice and 3 times and 4 times before we actually do something. And that's a balance, because we also need to be more proactive. We need to take more risk. We need to create more customer value for the citizens in Sweden. And that's what's expected for us. And we can't be too afraid of doing something or anything. So it's kind of trickier, but I would say that it's a slight difference, at least, between the private sector and public sector. But you might have different opinions, Björn and Ashutosh, maybe. But
Totally sure. I mean, from an AI point of view, as Elaine mentioned earlier, we have this exponential possible gains from AI together with these exponential risks with it as well. So, and I mean, private or public sector, we're all human beings. So that means that the biases that stems from us being humans, obviously it's there, it's in both the public and the private sector. But I do agree with you there with the accountability being higher in the public sector, because it's easier with, or more, even more important in the public sector for sure.
So I think great points, and I will add just a few more. Is the risks are there in both, whether it's the public sector or the private sector. Some of the differences, the way we see it, is that in public sector, the good thing is that there are a lot of regulations. So there are a lot of restrictions around what you can or cannot do. But at the same time, it also means that you have less freedom to do certain things. In private sector, companies are able to do affirmative action. They are able to more easily build an inclusive environment. So for example, better environment for women, to offer them internship and other things, right? Which at times are much harder to do in public sector. And the third part is the conscious things versus subconscious thing. Just depending upon what processes you have put in place, you may end up saying that I'm not able to find enough qualified individuals. But that may not be the case, right? So because of your regulation, you may not be able to hire people who have the potential, and then further limiting and adding more risk. So I think one has to be just conscious of the sector you are in, what industry you are in, what is your objective, right? And if you are, then you can help.
Thank you. I just have a couple more questions, and then we're going to open up for some questions for the audience. So if anyone in the audience does have any questions, please be sure to leave them in the chat box so that we can get to them. Next, I want to talk about some of the policy implications of sustainable AI. So do you see any regulatory or other hurdles ahead? Ashutosh, let's start with you if you have some comments on this question.
I think we do need certain policies and certain regulations in this space. All of us have, I mean, I think what was very nice today is that everyone talked about explainability and transparency of the AI algorithms. And I think we need policies around that data can be regulated, measured, monitored on an ongoing basis. The part that I will worry about is, unfortunately, as humans, all of us are biased. We have our own biases that we bring into the work every day. One of the fundamental differences that I see between AI and human being is that AI or computer has an ability to forget and ignore. Humans don't. So for AI, it's much easier to build algorithms and systems that are unbiased compared to human beings. So what shouldn't happen is, as part of these policies and regulations, we end up taking 2 steps backwards. because our world, our society does need help right now to reduce biases, to improve diversity. So I think that is one thing we should be careful of. But at the same time, another point that was brought up by John was having the right data set, right algorithms, right measurement, right policies in place, right? And through regulations and government policies, we can ensure that our companies using the right data. Are they using it in the right way? Are they measuring the right things? So I think the policies are needed to ensure that we are able to reduce the bias on an ongoing basis and improve diversity, especially in employment sector.
Thank you.
I think also if I, sorry.
Go ahead, Anna.
I think there's on the policy and the regulatory issue, sometimes there's a lack of policy, and sometimes there's a hesitance to apply old regulation to new circumstances. And sometimes the regulation is contracting, because for example, in Sweden, if we talk about transparency, if that becomes a regulation, then that's when the work begins, because what does transparency mean for me? And is it even legal, or is it legal but will hurt me? So for public agency, we have a principle to have the information public. But if you have code public, then you could game against public agency, and that's not a situation that you want. And then also you can have the interface with, in this case, Johan, caseworkers. Is the result of the AI model, is it a recommendation or a decision? So first it's the interpretation of it, because that's different legal context if it's a decision and or a recommendation. So there are some interpretations and leaned in attitudes from both policy but also compliance and lawyers to lean in.
One obvious questions that we run into quite often is then, can machine take decisions then, being an authority like Arbetsförmedlingen then, and then the accountability, because you need to be able to explain why a decision has been taken then, and then I have no problems if I have a good risk scoring and a solution that has been really qualified from before, then I have no problems letting a machine take a decision, and I as responsible can be accountable for that in the same way as, because but we haven't we believe too much in that the manual people are much more reliable in a sense. If a manual caseworker takes the wrong decision, then we have a tendency to point to that person and say, you did wrong, and the overall boss within that organization is not as accountable anyway for the organization there. But I believe we need to shift that approach a bit, because that's something we're stuck with right now, that, okay, you can't have machines taking decisions, but and I would like to challenge that quite soon, because that doesn't make sense to me in the future, which will be much more digitally driven than we have today then. So that's one challenge we have from a regulatory perspective then. Otherwise, I don't think we have regulatory aspects actually hindering us from the development going forward.
I would actually say that regulating AI, I would like it to be more regulated if we can do it, as you're saying here, more transparent, so that we can have accountability within the AI that we're using. And as you mentioned, Anna, going from this black box approach into a glass box approach, because we do have other laws like the discriminative law, the law against discrimination. And if you as a job seeker believe that you might have been a part of discrimination, then you can file a report against the company, and the company has to prove that there has not been any discrimination. Okay, so we have that law in place already, but if we have an AI from a black box perspective, where data comes in one place and then you have recommendations for decisions at the other end, and if you cannot explain what happens in this black box, then how can you actually say that you have or have not been discriminated? So we need to have it regulated, according to me anyway. And I mean, we could do it in, you don't necessarily have to put your code on your website, but you can explain every part of the algorithm that you're using. We can at least do that.
Thank you. We have some questions coming in from the audience, so I'd like to pivot so we can get a few of those answered. The first is on how do you inform your users about the use of AI? So for example, will I, as a user of one of these platforms, know if you're using AI or how you're using it?
We are actually informing everyone that if you become a customer to Arbetsförmedlingen, you are subject to being profiled by an AI engine then. So that is something we have to do then to inform about that. So for the case I had, we need to improve. We need to inform all the customers.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for our users as well. We have all the components on our webpage so that you can actually read through and see how the AI actually works. Yeah,
absolutely. I think
they're all part of the center. They're all part of the AI Sustainability Center.
No, I agree from our perspective as well. It is very important for users to have the transparency into not only AI is being used, but how it is being used. And most importantly, can it be a coach and guide for them to get to the right place?
Thank you. And the next question is, if you want to start using AI in recruitment, where do you start? And how do you make sure that you're being sustainable and ethical from the very beginning?
I think if I were to go first, I think one should think of this problem holistically versus as a part or a point solution. Because you have to think from the top of the funnel that why are you doing recruitment in the first place? Because you have challenges with attrition, people are leaving at times. You may have a non-inclusive environment. I will give a very simple example over here, which some of you may relate to, is that if you are looking for a data scientist, and in your job requirements, if you ask for Python as a required skill, guess what? There are only 15% data scientists who are women who know Python. But instead of that, if you said that I'm okay with Python or R as a language, then suddenly you have improved your chances of hiring a woman by 2x, because more than 30% of data scientists who know R are women. Then in every step of the process, right? Even if we do everything right over there, top of the funnel, during the interview process, we may create a bias and issues, right? So if we apply AI to the entire process, think of it in a holistic fashion, we can build a lot more sustainable system that will thrive. It will be a lot more inclusive. And not only then we will improve the quality of employment, will help people grow and nurture, but also improve diversity.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Any comments from the studio?
I would say if you're about to start using AI in recruitment, then to be sure to control it and not let it be automatically updated along the way and then see what happens, but control it and test it and see and double check it manually first, obviously, before you actually go into letting it run freely.
And then again, with all the AI solutions, data quality is something we haven't really spoken too much about, but data quality is key, and we need to have lots of data too. And data quality for our organization at least means that we need to have objective data coming in. It can't be too much self-assessment from different people, and that makes the entire solution much less reliable then. So data quality, make sure you have qualified data that you're using from external sources. That's key to any AI-driven organization, I would say.
We have just a few minutes left, but one last question came in. So I'd like to ask the question with just the few minutes we have remaining. The question is, private sector is primarily driven by creating shareholder equity, and we're seeing right now how social media companies aren't able to balance that driver with their societal responsibility. How can we ensure that AI as an exponential technology takes a different route? If false trust is built, will we do more damage?
Well,
please go ahead.
I'll leave it for the private sector then.
I think that's an excellent question. And I'm assuming some of you have watched the movie Social Dilemma recently. And it shows how can you do wrong? How far can you go right? But it's driven a lot by not just the technology, but your business model, your mission, how you're approaching these problems. If your business model is aligned with just improving the click-through rate, that is what will happen. So one thing that we have focused very hard on is ensuring that our business objective, right, the way we monetize, the way we charge the customers is well aligned with the outcome, which is either improving diversity or improving employment, but not just saying that how can we move people faster through the process, or not just can you send more emails or in-mails or any of those things. And one example of that is when COVID happened, we launched Talent Exchange. And during pandemic, it has been free for everyone. So we don't even monetize it. And the reason we don't monetize is because in these times, it is important to really do what you have been preaching. If hundreds of thousands to millions of people are impacted and looking for a job in these times, do you want to wait for companies to sign a long contract and pay you a lot of money? Because that will create unintended consequences. So you have to really think about that stuff. And in particular, in my case, fortunately, I was at Google in the early days when some of these algorithms were designed over there. So I have seen firsthand what kind of pitfalls can happen, what kind of mistakes can be made, and what kind of measurements and analytics need to be put in place to ensure that this does not happen.
Any final thoughts over in the studio?
I would say that, well, one way to do it is to actually regulate it and say that, well, you have to be able to explain your AI and who's accountable for it. And then if you do that, and if you have it publicly, then let's not forget about the power of the consumers. I mean, if we show it and we're proud of it, then I'm sure that the consumers can choose, okay, what type of company do I wanna be with, and what kind of company should use my data? So I think that could be one way forward.
Thank you. We've run out of time for this panel, but thank you all for the amazing discussion. Anna, would you like to provide any concluding thoughts before we transition to the end of the program?
Well, the creation of value of doing this responsibly will increase over the next year to come. So I think we will look at these past years as a kind of a naive stance from consumer citizens' perspective, and our children will kind of accuse us for leakaging of our integrity in our homes. But as Björn said, I think the trust in consumers and the shifted responsibility of how explaining how the data is used is going to be business crucial for all organizations.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for a fantastic discussion. We heard some great insights on the implications of using AI for recruitment and hiring decisions. That concludes our program for today. Now I'd like to ask Annika to return for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Chanel, and also all the speakers for sharing your very valuable insights, and also for overcoming some of the technical challenges that we are all facing these days when doing things virtual. I would just conclude by saying, as the Swedish government emphasized the need for strong relationships with leading AI environments, I think today has been a good example of that, how we could build relations and how we could make them deeper and share the experiences and perspectives. And I certainly hope that the collaboration between the AI Sustainability Center and the New York Academy of Sciences will continue and lead to many more ways of collaboration between the US and Sweden. The Consulate General and myself will, of course, be very happy to host new events, hopefully not only virtual, but also in real life. But that remains to be seen when and how. But in the meantime, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you and bye.
Bye.
Thank you.